All right, let's talk about ethanol. It's this fuel that's been hyped up as a green alternative to the gasoline we pump every day. But, the story here is, well, it's not that simple. Is this really the fuel of the future, or is it more of a complicated detour on our road to clean energy? So let's just start with this one question. Think about it. We fill up our cars with fuel that's been drilled from deep, deep underground. But what if your next tank of gas could actually grow on a farm, like right alongside corn and wheat? That right there is the big idea behind bioethanol. And we're talking about this for a reason. The stakes are absolutely massive. The transportation sector, that's our cars, our trucks, our planes, is responsible for more than a fifth of all global greenhouse gas emissions. That's the huge problem that's got everyone scrambling for an alternative. And ethanol's rise on the world stage was, well, dramatic to say the least. You can see it right here. Kicked into high gear by the oil crisis in the 70s and this growing sense of environmental awareness, production just skyrocketed. It went from being this tiny niche product to a major global industry. Okay, so what exactly is this stuff we're talking about? At its core, bioethanol is a renewable fuel. It's made by fermenting sugars, and you can get those sugars from all sorts of things. Sugar-heavy crops like sugarcane, starchy stuff like corn, or even what we'd normally call waste, like wood chips and straw. All right, let's break down the arguments for and against. The whole promise of ethanol is really built on this long list of potential upsides. Better energy security, maybe cleaner air, a boost for world economies. But, as you're about to see, every single one of those benefits comes with a potential cost. And that climate benefit, it isn't just a theory. When you do a full well-to-wheels analysis, that means from growing the crop all the way to burning the fuel in your car, you see that not all ethanol is created equal. I mean, look at this. Grain-based ethanol gives you a pretty decent 30% emissions cut, but sugarcane ethanol from Brazil, that can slash emissions by over 80%. That's huge. But here is where the story gets really complicated. The most famous argument you'll hear against ethanol is this idea of food versus fuel. The question is, are we taking crops that could be feeding people and instead using them to power our cars? And is that driving up the price of food for everyone? But it's not quite so black and white. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization adds this really crucial layer of nuance. They argue that, look, the world can actually produce enough food. The real problems are economic and political, things like trade barriers that stop food from getting to the people who need it most. And then there's this other hidden cost. To grow a lot of corn, you need a lot of nitrogen fertilizers. The problem is, those fertilizers can release something called nitrous oxide, N2O. And this stuff, it's a greenhouse gas that's nearly 300 times more powerful than CO2. In some cases, its impact can pretty much wipe out any climate benefit the ethanol might have had. So how does all this actually affect your car? First, let's get the lingo down. You've got E10. That's the 10% mix you see in most regular gas today. Then you jump up to things like E85, which is an 85% blend for special flex fuel vehicles. And then you have E100, which is almost pure ethanol, something you'd really only see in a place like Brazil. And no, you can't just pour these high ethanol blends into any old car. As that percentage of ethanol goes up, more and more systems in the car need to be changed. You can just see it here. The red areas, which show necessary modifications, they just spread across everything from the fuel pump to the ignition system. To make this crystal clear, let's just zoom in for a second. The thing is, ethanol can be kind of corrosive to certain plastics and rubbers used in older cars. So on a typical engine, that means parts like your fuel hoses, your O-rings, the seals, even the coating inside the fuel tank, they all need to be swapped out for tougher, more resistant materials. Now for the question every single driver asks, what's this going to do to my mileage? Well, the simple physics of it is that ethanol just has less energy packed into it than gasoline, about 33% less per liter. So even with a perfectly tuned engine, that's very likely going to mean more trips to the pump. Oh, and another big technical problem? Ethanol hates the cold. Seriously, it doesn't vaporize well when temperatures drop, which makes engines a real pain to start. Brazil solved this with a clever little separate gasoline tank just for starting up. In colder places, they often use engine block heaters, but that means you gotta find a place to plug your car in. Okay, so we've seen the promise, and we've seen some pretty major problems. That brings us to the road ahead. How is innovation actually working to solve these challenges and, build a better future for ethanol?
A huge breakthrough here is what's called second-generation ethanol. The whole idea is to make fuel from stuff we can't eat anyway. We're talking agricultural waste like corn cobs, super tough grasses, even wood chips. This technology is designed to tackle that whole food versus fuel problem head-on.
And the potential here is, well, it's massive. Get this. Cellulosic ethanol made from something like switchgrass could cut greenhouse gas emissions by up to 94% compared to gasoline. I mean, that is a potential game changer. Then, on the vehicle side of things, the answer is the flex fuel vehicle, or FFV. These cars are built from the factory, from the ground up, to handle any blend of ethanol and gasoline you throw at them, all the way up to E85. It completely removes the guesswork and all those compatibility worries for the driver. And to see how this all comes together in the real world, you just have to look at Brazil. They started their national ethanol program called ProAlcool way back in 1975. Fast forward to 2003, they introduced flex fuel vehicles, and today they have this incredibly mature ethanol economy that really is a case study for the entire world. So it's pretty clear ethanol is not some magic bullet, right? It's a fuel of really complex trade-offs: land use, technology, food security, you name it. But as we race to find alternatives to oil, maybe the real question is this: on the long, difficult road to a clean energy future, is this imperfect fuel a necessary one? That's something to think about.